Okay, this week there's a couple things that are pretty obvious that I'm going to talk about if you've been paying any attention to the news. We talk each week, and it seems like each week more and more things are converging to indicate that we really live near the end of time. And I'm going to back out of my presentation for 1 second here because I see that my slides are not in order. Hang on here. Okay. I apologize for this. This is what happens when you work right up until just before you start. So we talk about the convergence of events and things that indicate that we do live in the last days, close to the end of the last days. We don't know exactly when. We don't know how long this will take. But it seems like more and more things that indicate that are happening each week. One of the things, and I really don't have time to talk about it today, is the economic situation. Couple interesting things about that in terms of oil, since oil is kind of the engine that drives everything in the world today. Despite the fact that everybody would like to stop using oil, there's no real viable alternative for the time being. One of the interesting things about this is that one of the major players in oil is Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of controversy about, is Saudi Arabia running out of oil? Have they reached peak? Maybe you've heard the term peak oil. Have we reached that point where there's not going to be any more oil found? And I'm not sure we're at that point. There's some indication that the earth regenerates oil on its own and that it's not a finite amount that's there. What's interesting that is there's a new study that just came out. I don't have a source for you right now. I can't remember where I read it this week. But a study that they've done shows that Saudi Arabia, if the earth is regenerating its oil, and it has to do with the way the plates and the tectonic plates of the earth fit together, Saudi Arabia is going to be an oil power for the foreseeable future. That's not going to change. The Middle East will be the main area where the oil is. The interesting thing that's going on there, though, is because the oil price is down, Saudi Arabia is hurting for money. Now, they have a lot of cash reserves, but at the price of oil right now, they're burning through their cash reserves. And the kingdom, obviously, the kingdom of Saudi Arabia does not want to lose their economic power. So they're thinking of taking Aramco, which is their oil company, and making part of it public. And a lot of people are talking that could be by far the largest public offering ever in the history of the stock markets. And that some estimate that the market cap on that company, I don't know what the market cap on Apple is. Is it a couple $100 billion maybe? They're estimating that if Saudi Arabia does this, that the market cap on Aramco would be about $2 trillion. So it'll have a major economic impact. But at the same time, though, there's these, you can see here the report from the Financial Times that the oil industry borrowers face more pain. And you see there a timeline from 2015 and 2016, the number of oil companies that have filed for bankruptcy protection in North America, 11 last month. And some of their debts, and you see here there's a graph in the lower left-hand corner that talks about unsecured and secured debt of these oil companies. These are oil producing companies that produce oil. They have over $30 billion in debt, but only a little over $10 billion of it is secured debt. So the banks are very, very exposed, and this will have a major impact if the price of oil does not change. And even with the increase in the price of oil, that's not changed. So that's an economic thing, and there's much, much more I could talk about in terms of the economy, but I just don't have the time this morning to do it with a couple of the issues that I want to focus on. The first one is the transgender issue. Now, some of you have been following this. Some of you have personally boycotted Target. I don't usually go there, so I don't know if I have to boycott them. But you can see here over the last this year what has happened to their stock price. It's dropped quite a bit. and the market cap of the company is down since they announced their bathroom policy. The value of the company is down about $4.5 billion. So you would think, well, they're business people. They'll take note of that and they'll do something about it. Here's the CEO of Target, a man named Cornell, who's speaking on CNBC Squawk Box the other day.
To continue to embrace our belief of diversity and embrace.
Okay.
We took a stance, and we're going to continue to embrace our belief of diversity and inclusion, just how important that is to our company. But we're also going to make sure our focus on safety is unwavering.
Well, okay, the title of the thing this week is Fighting God. And this whole transgender issue and the way it's playing out in the public is becoming an indication that the world, at least the secular left, the people who are not Christians, are fighting God, fighting God's design. This goes back to the order of creation. Jesus himself said that when God made them, and Jesus probably knew this, given who he was, that God made them male and female. He didn't say he made them male, female, and whatever you want, whatever you chose to be that day. And so now we have these ridiculous things like LGBTQIA, NB plus A, I, NB would be for non-binary. Okay, do you remember that? There was somebody who asked President Obama a question when he was in England, I believe, and she said, "I'm a non-binary individual." She looked, and I said she asked him a question because she looked like a female, she dressed like a female, but she claimed she was non-binary and that she didn't know whether she was male or female. Now, I'm very sympathetic to the fact that these people may be mentally ill. There's reports this week that Bruce Jenner, that's a Freudian slip, so to speak, is thinking of detransitioning. Now listen, he never had the surgery, so he never transitioned. He's still a male. And, my heart, when I watch him, I feel like I'm watching a human train wreck if I see him. That he really needs help. He needs Jesus, and he needs help to get over this problem. And so I'm sympathetic to that fact. And we talked about this last week, the transgender bathroom policy things is not so much about the transgender people themselves, but it's about people who will take advantage of that. And there is story after story after story of these assaults happening in restrooms because these stupid idiots like this Target CEO, and I apologize for insulting stupid idiots by equating him with them. This man is moronic, that he cannot see, and he gets up there on public and talks about, oh, we're committed to safety. Baloney. And by the way, I told somebody this, I don't know if I can do this without swearing. So you pray for me that I keep my language correct today, because this is very frustrating to me to watch this go on. It is a culture that has gone insane, in my opinion. And the church needs to, so this church will, it says men and women out there, we mean it, okay, on the rooms back there. There's a handicap restroom that you can use if you're confused, and Pastor Steve will counsel you as well. But this is, and so this week, of course, here was the, all over the papers, the Attorney General of the United States announced a lawsuit against North Carolina. So I'm going to play a couple clips of her, a few minutes. I think you need to watch them and listen to what she says and just ask you, is this a person who's fighting God's design? And I think the answer will be self-evident. But so here is her announcement about the issue that the Department of Justice had with North Carolina They wanted North Carolina to back off their HB2 that was passed in the state of North Carolina. The state of North Carolina said, could we have some more time to think about it? The Department of Justice said, yeah. And North Carolina, to their credit, bless their hearts, they went and filed a lawsuit against the Department of Justice. Good for them. And they ought to stick to it all the way through. And the people of North Carolina ought to support that. So this upset the Sultan in Washington, the president in Washington, D.C., who's forgotten that he's a president and not a sultan or an emir of some caliphate. And so here's his chief law enforcement officer.
The bill sought to strike down an anti-discrimination provision in a recently passed Charlotte, North Carolina ordinance, as well as to require transgender people in public agencies to use the bathrooms consistent with their sex as noted at birth, rather than the bathrooms that fit their gender identity. The bill was signed into law that same day. And in so doing, the legislature and the governor placed North Carolina in direct opposition to federal laws prohibiting discrimination.
Now, first of all, I want you to know this. She is lying through her teeth, okay? She's a liar. There is no law on gender identity issues. There's a law preventing discrimination on sex. It's been in place since 1972, and it was mainly designed to help women out. You know, because women didn't have access to athletic opportunities in college and things like this. Now, there's been one decision that's taken the sex language and said it applies to transgender individuals out of the Fourth Circuit. And so as soon as that decision came down, these idiots in the Department of Justice said, okay, we're going to do everything we want. We're going to change everything. Okay, so the law never changed. It's these people who think they have the ability to enact law, not enforce existing law, that are the problem. Okay, so I hope that was clear.
But this action is about a great deal more.
Hang on here.
The bill sought to strike down an anti-discrimination provision in a recently passed Charlotte, North Carolina ordinance, as well as to require transgender people in public agencies to use the bathrooms consistent with their sex as noted at birth, rather than the bathrooms that fit their gender identity. The bill was signed into law that same day. And in so doing, the legislature and the governor placed North Carolina in direct opposition to federal laws prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sex and gender identity. More to the point, they created state-sponsored discrimination against transgender individuals who simply seek to engage in the most private of functions in a place of safety and security, a right taken for granted by most of us. Last week, our Civil Rights Division notified state officials in North Carolina that House Bill 2 violates federal civil rights laws. We asked that they certify by the end of the day today that they would not comply with or implement House Bill 2's restriction on restroom access. An extension was requested by North Carolina and was under active consideration. But instead of replying to our offer or providing a certification, this morning, the state of North Carolina and its governor chose to respond by suing the Department of Justice. As a result of their decisions, we are now moving forward. Today, we are filing a federal civil rights lawsuit against the state of North Carolina, Governor Pat McCrory, the North Carolina Department of Public Safety, and the University of North Carolina. We are seeking a court order declaring HB2's restroom restriction impermissibly discriminatory, as well as a statewide bar on its enforcement. Now, while the lawsuit currently seeks declaratory relief, I want to note that we retain the option of curtailing federal funding to the North Carolina Department of Public Safety and the University of North Carolina as this case proceeds.
Now listen, this I get a little exercise about this. I want to know, where is Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, who's been talking for weeks about his conservative principles, why has he not done one stinking thing about this? They control the purse strings in Congress. Now look, if Obama vetoes it, send something up there every day of the week and make him veto it. Make him look like the obstructionist. Don't just sit there and take it if you believe in your so-called conservative principles. I have my doubts, Mr. Ryan. I have my doubts, Republican Party. I have my doubts, Governor Kasich. What do you say, Governor Kasich? Are you going to take a stand on this? He hasn't yet, the right one. She continues.
But this action is about a great deal more than bathrooms. This is about the dignity and the respect that we accord our fellow citizens and the laws that we as a people and as a country have enacted to protect them, indeed, to protect all of us. And it's about the founding ideals that have led this country, haltingly but inexorably, in the direction of fairness, inclusion, and equality for all Americans. This is not the first time that we have seen discriminatory responses to historic moments of progress for our nation.
So that was on Monday or Tuesday. Friday, as we talked about last week that this was coming, they issued a joint thing. You can see here the letterhead, U.S. Department of Justice, U.S. Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights, and the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ, issued a letter, guidance to schools. Every single school in the country is supposed to receive one of these. And so the question is, what do you do about this? Go to your school board. Ask your school board members, are you going to go along with this, or are you going to stand up to this bullying by the federal government? And if they say no, then vote them out of office. That's the simple way to do it. Make them accountable for where they're going to stand on this particular issue. And I would also tell them, we're going to hold you personally responsible for assaults that take place because of the implementation of this rule. And you're on notice. For example, here's out of the Financial Times in London. Policies to help transitioning staff. This is a major business newspaper. And again, I'm sympathetic to the issues here, okay? But we are creating mental illness on the parts of people by allowing them to do this. It makes no sense. But this was not all that happened on Friday. How many of you know that in addition to the schools, they issued a directive to all healthcare providers and insurance companies in the United States on the same issue? How many of you even knew that? That's in the news. You see the headline there from the Washington Post on the right? Acts aimed to guard gender identity. Obama targets transgender bias. Protections proposed for schools, health insurance. And so listen to what the article says, because this actually happened hours after directing public schools nationwide to allow transgender students to use the bathroom of their choice. The administration issued a second directive prohibiting health insurers from denying transgender Americans coverage and services based on gender identity. And this is a report. This was noted. Here's a picture of the summary of the final rule, and it applies to any health program or activity, any part of which receives funding from HHS, such as hospitals that accept Medicare or doctors who accept Medicaid. Any health program that HHS itself ministers, Health and Human Services, health insurance marketplaces, and insurers that participate in those marketplaces. They're getting as many people drug into this as they can. The final rule requires, this summary says, that women be treated equally with men in the health care they receive, and also prohibits the denial of health care or health coverage based on individual sex, including discrimination based on pregnancy, gender identity, and sex stereotyping. This is all part of a well-designed plan to undermine basic Christian biblical morality. That's exactly what, and listen, this Obama guy is not a Christian. We all know that here, but I'm just saying there's some people out there, they want to say that. I mean, I saw Russell Moore. Russell Moore is head of the Southern Baptist Ethic and Policy division or something. Well, I don't know what they do. He gets a big salary and a pension. I know that, okay? And so what did he say? Well, he said, this really doesn't seem right. And boy, when we elected Obama back in 2009, we're really surprised. Listen, if you are surprised, you were not paying attention to who this guy was. And you're heading up a division about policy and ethics, and you couldn't see this coming from this guy? The final rule also requires health programs and activities to treat individuals consistent with their gender identity. This is not based on science. This is postmodernism run amok. This is all based on feelings. This is from, I covered this a month or so ago. Gender identity ideology harms children, from the American College of Pediatricians. They say you don't treat a male child as a male or a female child as a female, and you get them confused, you are engaged in child abuse. One of the guys who authored this was Dr. McHugh, who used to be a psychiatrist. He's a professor emeritus or psychiatrist emeritus at Johns Hopkins, which is where they did the first of these sexual reassignment, sex change surgeries. And they stopped 40 years ago. Why? Because it didn't work. What did they find? People who had sex change operations were 22 times more likely to commit suicide than the people that were confused about their gender identity that didn't have the surgery. And that well above 90% of kids who have the problem, if you continue to treat them as a male, they outgrow it and they have a normal life. But now we got the government running around turning people mentally ill at a minimum. The Washington Post article, the significant guidance to school administrators followed an April 19th ruling by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, which seemed to invite action by the White House. The majority opinion indicated that federal guidance on what constitutes sex discrimination under Title IX of a 1972 education law was out of date. Then Congress gets to change it. You as a judge, you don't get to change it. You as a member of the Department of Justice, you don't get to change it. Go down and bug the people in Congress. That's the way the system worked until the Sultanate took over. The directive from the Education and Justice Departments instructs schools to ensure that transgender students have access to bathrooms, sports teams, and other facilities of their choice. Now, this is a very interesting thing. This is where I love it when nutty ideas on the left collide. Okay, so now they're saying, the whole purpose for Title IX was to give women opportunities in athletics. Now they're saying if a guy identifies as a male, let's say some 6'4" muscular guy identifies as a female, he gets to play basketball on the female team if he wants. Let's see how long this, you talk about living in a state of cognitive dissonance. This is it. The education directive was issued in the form of an 8-page letter by the Secretary of Education for Civil Rights and Vanita Gupta, head of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. It also included a 25-page packet of examples of policies and emerging practices for supporting transgender students. Schools have a responsibility to provide a safe and non-discriminatory environment for all students, including transgender students, they wrote. The administration's new health insurance rule, finalized Friday by the HHS, will affect hundreds of thousands of Americans who have been denied coverage or treatment based on their gender identity or sexual orientation. While the rule does not require insurers to automatically approve all gender transitioning services, it does. It means they cannot categorically deny coverage as they have in the past. These affected services can range from vaginal reconstruction to treatment for ovarian cancer, even when an individual identifies as a man. Representative Trent Franks, who chairs the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Constitutional and Civil Rights Matters, suggests that congressional action may follow Friday's directives. I would love to see that. I'm not holding my breath. After this president is gone, Congress is going to probably spend the next 20 years trying to clean up after him. This administration has completely thrown out not only reason, but the Constitution he swore to preserve in the trash. He's absolutely right. Good for him for being the one guy that I've heard who's spoken out against this. It's only one that I've seen. Now, other than some state governors. By the way, Pat McCrory, you know what he did before he became governor of North Carolina? He was the mayor of Charlotte. So once he got out of office, then they enacted that thing, and then they got the thing passed at the state level. So here's a lieutenant governor from Texas who's speaking out and saying, well, you'll hear what he says.
We will not be blackmailed by the president's 30 pieces of silver. If they want to keep their money, keep their money. They're not going to buy our children. They're not going to tell families what to do. We will find a way in Texas to find the dollars if they want to pull the money.
This does underscore the risk of electing a right-wing radio host to a statewide elected office.
The arrogance, do you see the arrogance there? Here's a discussion on special report Friday night, Charles Krauthammer's comments.
Well, look, on one level you could say it's a fairly small problem, tiny population, but there's something very large at stake here. And that is that the federal government is unilaterally decreeing, without a debate, without consulting with Congress, that as of now, sex is no longer, or gender is no longer a fixed category, as we have assumed for, say, 5,000 years, but actually is simply a matter of declaration, of preference. That is a huge step. It's going to have a lot of implications in the future. Again, this is a rather trivial issue, the use of the bathrooms, in comparison with other items on our agenda. It's important to the individuals involved. But this is a major change on how we view one of the defining aspects of any person. And I think it deserves a lot more than simply a declaration that unless you accept the idea that you can declare yourself a man on a Monday and a woman on a Wednesday, and it's completely up to you, that unless you accept that, you are a bigot, and you are acting like the segregationist in the South 60 years ago. I think that is a huge step, and the use of the power of the federal government to bully, I think that's the right word, to enforce this, I think, is disgraceful. It just shows how the arrogance of an administration unilaterally sort of overriding federalism, the separation of powers, we already know about that, is a terrible example for the future.
I want to step back to last June. I want you to remember, we are only 10 and a half months past when the Supreme Court issued its same-sex marriage decision. Do you see how quickly things have unfolded in the last 10 and a half months? It's really mind-blowing when you think about it. I mean, really. But, so I wanted to take you back. You've got to listen to this, because this told us, just like on June 4th, 2009, when he went to Cairo, Egypt, and told us that the Arab Spring was coming and that he was going to capitulate to the Muslim agenda, President Obama stood in the Rose Garden of the White House and said what needed to be done with regard to people who objected to the Supreme Court decision. So June 26, 2015, the day the Supreme Court Obergefell decision came down, he said this.
I know change for many of our LGBT brothers and sisters must have seemed so slow for so long. But compared to so many other issues, America's shift has been so quick. I know that Americans of goodwill continue to hold a wide range of views on this issue. Opposition in some cases has been based on sincere and deeply held beliefs. All of us who welcome today's news should be mindful of that fact. Recognize different viewpoints. Revere our deep commitment to religious freedom.
Listen, it's not just based on beliefs. It's based on scientific fact. But you see what he's doing? He's undermining science. And they're the pro-science people? Well, anyway, he goes on to talk about that. But if you think it's going to get any better, and Bret Stephens, who I respect a lot, in his analysis on foreign policy and that type of thing, wrote an article this week and said, the conservative case for Hillary Clinton. We'll just have the... Did some of you see this article? Look, somebody was saying, you must be pro-Trump because you don't criticize Trump. You haven't... I'm like, have you not been able to find anything negative about Donald Trump? I mean, just, it's pretty easy to find. I'm just telling you what I think is the worst case scenario to avoid in this whole thing, this election. But Bret Stephens says, well, we'll elect Hillary Clinton and the Republicans will not let her do anything and they'll stand firm and How has that worked for 8 years? I'm telling you, I look at this and I'm like, you know, you want to slap people, like, wake up. But remember, this was almost exactly 1 year ago. It was the end of April. Last year, she gave a speech at the Women in the World conference, and she said this. Now, we heard what President Obama said, right? We're going to have to get these people to change. Now, they might have sincerely held beliefs, but what would the candidate that might replace him want to replace him say?
All the laws we've passed don't count for much if they're not enforced. Rights have to exist in practice, not just on paper. Laws have to be backed up with resources and political will. And deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed. All the laws we've...
Okay? That should be played day after day after day in your mind. Religious beliefs have to be changed to support her religion. It's the same religion as Barack Obama. There's a leftism religion. I mean, because it's not based on science. You saw that this week. You might be a male, but you think you're a female, so you're really a male in our mind. I mean, that's not scientific. It's insane. Look at what it says, though, in these DOJ things. No new religious exemption. The proposed rule sought comment on whether there should be an exemption for religious organizations in circumstances which non-discriminatory obligations conflict religious belief. As noted above, the final rule in Section 1557 does not include a religious exemption. However, the final rule does not displace existing protections for religious freedom and conscience. In Illinois, there was a male, who claimed he was female, and his parents wanted accommodation made for him to use the girls' locker room. They wanted him identified as a female on all of his school records. The school capitulated to every single one of their demands save one, and that was that he not be allowed to shower with 14 and 15-year-old girls. The Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education, the school district said, we'll make other accommodations. The Office of Civil Rights said, rejected what the Illinois school district wanted to do, Palatine Township near Chicago, and said that their arguments that they had to do something else other than allow him to shower in the locker room with these girls was unavailing. What do you think the government is going to do with everybody who claims a religious exemption or a conscience violation? They don't find common sense arguments availing. They specifically find them unavailing. Romans chapter 1, verse 22, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause, God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women to change the natural use into that which is against nature. Verse 28. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. I think additional commentary on those verses, in light of what we see unfolding in our world right now, is unnecessary. We are at that point, no doubt. Let's see. Well, this mayor was elected in London. Let's talk about this for a minute. Donald Trump's ignorant view of Islam could make both our countries less safe. It risks alienated mainstream Muslims around the world and plays into the hands of extremists. A columnist writing in Financial Times, Gillian Tett, what New York can learn from London. And she talked about, well, maybe New York will elect a Muslim as mayor. She notes this, never mind the fact that there are an estimated 800,000 to 900,000 people of Islamic faith living in New York. A Muslim in office was simply too divisive, with or without the antagonism now being whipped up by people such as Donald Trump. By the way, there's 8 million people in London, 1 million Muslims. About 12%, 12.5% of the population, and this man was elected in a landslide in London. As I listened, I felt sad about the tarnished image of Islam today. You know, she had to go down Oxford. There's a video out there. I just saw it this morning. Look it up, Oxford debate on Islam. And the lady who's speaking, she goes through this wonderful litany of, you know, Sudan, Algeria, Nigeria, ISIS, Iraq. She lists about 20 things, and she's like, Islam's not tarnished because we talk about it. It's tarnished because of what it does. But this is what an elite person says, a tarnished image of Islam. But I was also struck by the subtle but powerful differences in how Londoners and New Yorkers talk about identity. To put it another way, when Mr. Khan says that being a Muslim is just one part of his multifaceted British identity, and it probably is for him, he's a man of the left, he is reflecting a vision that many voters share and embody. Why do they feel this way? One reason is that British people are less earnest about religion than many Americans, but more importantly, in modern London, identities are fluid. You see the connection here? They lose the ability to reason. It's a reprobate mind. God gives them over, and they, as our friend Jacob Prash says, they think like morons. There's just no other, I can't think of another way to describe it. Mr. Khan's election makes me very proud of my London origins, not because he is a Muslim, but because most voters do not particularly care that he is. And I'm hoping that he will visit New York soon to highlight the truth that identity does not have to sit in neat boxes, even in the ballot box. The very wise Melanie Phillips wrote a great article Friday in the Jerusalem Post, From Zero to Hero in Londonistan. Now, she wrote a book called Londonistan about 10 years ago, saying this is what's going to happen, and pretty much everything she said in that book, still available, you can buy it, is coming true. Those wondering whether Britain now gets it about the threat from Islamic extremism or whether it is still a weak link in the West defense chain would do well to look at the election last week of Sadiq Khan as London's mayor. During the campaign, several people from the Prime Minister, David Cameron, downward, expressed anxiety about Khan's past association with Islamists. Britain's Defense Secretary, Michael Fallon, suggested that London would be in more danger from extremists if Khan was in charge, a claim he later softened under pressure. A strange thing then happened. Khan's election ricocheted the new mayor and former Labor MP from zero to hero. Those who expressed extremism concerns have been denounced as racist. Sidebar. Their attackers appear to think Islam is a race, but let's put that to one side. Yeah, when they reason like they do, you think Islam is a race. Londoners are now telling themselves gleefully they have elected the most powerful Muslim politician in the Western world. Some people in America might dispute that, but that's another discussion. Representing 8.5 million people and responsible for a 17 billion pound budget. The concerns expressed about him, however, remain unaddressed. His repeated support for a succession of Islamists seemed to go way beyond his duties as a human rights lawyer. For a period, he chaired the Legal Affairs Committee of the Muslim Council of Britain, a group linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, identified by the United States Department of Justice as a terrorist organization. Khan's election is being represented as a victory over bigotry. One commenter noted that as a thick, dense fog of self-congratulation had settled over the city for electing a Muslim. In 2004, Khan told members of parliament that the Brotherhood cleric Yusuf al-Qaradawi, you know who he was? He was the main al-Qaeda religious man who sort of filled in when Osama bin Laden was killed. I believe he's American, lived in Yemen, was killed in a drone strike. He's a terrorist. He's an Amman terrorist. And so what did the mayor say back in 2004? He is not the extremist that he is painted as being, even though Qaradawi supported suicide bombing in Israel and Iraq and justified wife beating and the punishment and possible execution of homosexuals. In his first statement as mayor, Khan falsely accused David Cameron of driving a wedge between Londoners on ethnic lines. Despite berating the Prime Minister for distracting attention from issues of concern to all Londoners such as housing, transport, and healthcare, the new mayor's very first comments played the Muslim card. And just like when you get into these discussions, you get into these discussions about theology and stuff, and, oh, you're just a Pharisee. Okay, here's my experience. The first person to make the Pharisee accusation is usually the Pharisee in the conversation. Okay? And the first thing he did was play the Muslim card, which means it's very, very important to him. Soon afterward, he played again by denouncing Donald Trump for intending to bar Muslims from America until his administration could figure out Islamic extremism. Rejecting Trump's statement that he would make an exception for London's new mayor, Khan declared that he was speaking for all Muslims. Yet this is the man who has supported murderous anti-Semites, who himself called for sanctions against Israel during Operation Cast Lead in Gaza in 2008, and who during Operation Protective Edge in 2014, just 2 years ago, condemned Israel for causing death, suffering, and hardship in the killing of hundreds of innocent civilians. He's as bad as our government. He doesn't care about facts either. If Israel were again forced to take military action against Hamas in Gaza, though, does anyone believe Khan would not once again be lending his voice to the false and anti-Jewish narrative of Israeli atrocities? Of course, he could say this is merely how the whole of progressive Britain views Israel. In this, he would be entirely correct. That's why Sadiq Khan is not the real problem in Afghanistan. Very, very excellent article by Melanie Phillips. I'm really short on time. This ISIS thing continues to grow. They're now threatening Israel. Caroline Glick, I don't have time to go into it, has a very good article in Friday's Jerusalem Post. You can go there and read it. We'll try to put the link in the show notes or the YouTube notes for here. The fruits of subversion. She talks about the fact that the Israeli military establishment has become very, very much a problem, and they're subverting Israel because they're more opposed to Netanyahu than they are about engaging in facts. And she cites a number of examples of the Israeli military leadership that are very, very troubling, and you really should go read that article. This is kind of interesting. In sign of deepening rift, Iranians won't join in the pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia. That is something that bears watching. So the Iranians won't be going to the Hajj this year. How many people died in the Hajj last year? It was thousands of people died. And so it's well said. Now I'm going to make a few comments about this, and then I'm going to close with an article about Caroline Glick about Israel. And so I'm going to try to do about 30 minutes of stuff in the next 12 minutes, which probably is not going to happen. But tomorrow, May 16th, 2016, is the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Now, the Sykes-Picot Agreement was an agreement between France and Britain to divide up essentially the remnants of the Ottoman Empire. There's been a lot of commentary on it this week because of the 100th year anniversary. Some people say it was not that big a deal that they enacted, and other people say this is what led to the problems in the Middle East. I think the best analysis is there were a couple of people, there were governments that thought that they could divide up the Middle East and draw borders where none had previously existed, and that there would be no consequences to that, and they were smarter than everybody else in the room. And the real issue is that we see what happens when those borders start to break down and there are not strongmen in place to oppress people. And literally all hell is broken loose in the Middle East. That's pretty obvious. And you can see here there's some good graphics from the New York Times this morning on their review section laying out, how Sykes-Picot divided it up. There was this dream that the Egyptian government have of creating a united Arab republic. Some of you remember that when we were younger. There was actually an alliance for a time. Syria and Egypt formed the United Arab Republic. Israel, of course, came into. France divided Syria up. The Americans came in. We thought we could do some things. And what we have now, though, is we have chaos in the Middle East. It's clear. Daniel Pipes, writing in last Monday's Washington Times, said a shocking document turns 100. The secret agreement that shaped the Middle East set the stage for lethal instability. And he's probably right. Another newspaper, I think this is in the Jerusalem Post, said borders melt down 100 years after the Sykes-Picot Agreement. This is the original, picture of the original document where they were going to divide up. This is Sykes on the left, Picot on the right, and the blue areas were, the A areas were France, the B areas were Britain, the yellow areas were Russia, the green areas were Italian. But the main area was there in the Mesopotamian Valley because of Iraq and Iran and all the things that converged there, including the oil wealth, and eventually led to the creation of Iran and Iraq. Here's a sort of Google Earth overlaid with the split in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And you can see, and so we're still dealing with these issues today. But the lines that were drawn on the map, I hope they were drawn in pencil because they've been erased now. The lines on the maps that you have, that you carry around, that you look at, we have this fiction that there's still an Iraq. We have this fiction that there's still a Syria. We have, these things they don't exist anymore. Iraq doesn't exist. Syria does not exist. There are, people won't put ISIS on the map even though it controls a large swath of the Middle East in this area. And it's a problematic thing. The Economist talked this week. Their whole cover article was a special report on the Arab world, the war within. And it talks about how, that this is a monastery that's outside of Mosul. And from there you can see sort of all these problems converging in the Middle East. They have some good maps there about what Sykes-Picot was and the problems it have today. And it shows the different ethnic and religious divisions within the Middle East, including where the oil wealth is. You can see it there going up through the Persian Gulf all the way up into Iraq, into what we would call the Kurdish areas of Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. Mainly, until you get into northern Iraq, they're mainly Shiite areas that control the oil wealth, even though So the oil wealth from Saudi Arabia comes from a Shiite area, even though the government of Saudi Arabia is Sunni. And there's tremendous tension there. So just listen to a couple things. In the euphoria of the uprisings in 2011, this is The Economist, when one awful Arab autocrat after another was toppled, it seemed as if the Arabs were at last turning towards democracy. Instead, their condition is more benighted than ever. Under al-Sisi, Egypt is even more wretched than under the ousted dictator Hosni Mubarak. The state has broken down in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and Yemen. Civil wars rage and sectarianism is rampant, fed by the contest between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Jihadist caliphate of the Islamic State, the grotesque outgrowth of Sunni rage, is metastasizing to other parts of the Arab world and beyond, I would add. Bleak as all this may seem, it could become worse still. So I'm glad they said this because people sometimes say, oh, you're so negative, So listen, this is The Economist, okay? This is a secular magazine saying it could get worse. If the Lebanese Civil War of 1975 to 90 is engaged, the Syrian one has many years to run. Other places may turn ugly. Algeria faces a leadership crisis. The insurgency in Sinai could spread to Egypt proper. Chaos threatens to overwhelm Jordan. In fact, I think I just saw an article as I was walking in here that Jordan Parliament says, we're not bound by this peace agreement that the monarchy entered into with Israel. We have a different view of that. Well, where do you think that's going to end up? So Jordan is often considered a relatively stable country. I think it's just a facade. Israel could be drawn into the fights on its borders. Low oil prices are destabilizing Gulf states, and the proxy conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran might lead to direct fighting. Arab states are suffering a crisis of legitimacy in a way they never got over the fall of the Ottoman Empire. The prominent ideologies, Arabism, Islamism, and now jihadism, have all sought some greater statehood beyond the frontiers left by the colonizers. Now that states are collapsing, Arabs are reverting to ethnic and religious identities. The crisis of the Arab world is deep and complex. Facile solutions are dangerous. 4 ideas in particular need to be repudiated. And I think rather than go through those 4, I'll let you, we'll put a link to the Economist article in the notes for the YouTube video, and you can go read those on your own. Now, so in light of all this instability, what always seems to come back to the core issue? The core issue is Israel. So the Middle East is melting down, and so what do they want to do? Well, they want to go after Israel. Because Israel's the problem, And our president is focused on, who goes to what bathroom. And so today there's an initiative. There's 2 things that are coming out. There's a French initiative to make peace between Israel and Palestine, and there's going to be a report come out from the Quartet in the next couple weeks. The Quartet being the 4 major powers that have been trying to force a peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Dorgold has a great thing, and this is in either Friday's or today's Jerusalem Post, about why we should say no to the French, and why Prime Minister Netanyahu brought up the Golan Heights, and why that's become such a hot issue. Because it's going to be an issue, and Dorgold is right. He says we brought it up because it's going to be an issue down the road, and we wanted to put a stake in the ground as to what our position is and what it's going to be and what's not going to change. And so, but what you see, though, is you see this kind of unfolding of all of this turmoil in the Middle East. Foreign Affairs had an article this week, Anti-Semitism and Terrorism. And it's an excellent article. Again, I don't have time to go into it. Another news weekly from England called the New maybe Scotland, the New Statesman. I think it's a center-left magazine called Anti-Semitism, the Longest Hatred. And it goes into quite an extensive discussion about this anti-Semitism. It's different than all other forms of what we would call racism in the world. Sadly, anti-Semitism in France is only the starkest manifestation of a growing contemporary Jew hatred in Europe and across the world. The cancerous belief that the world is run by an international Jewish conspiracy shapes the worldview of much of Iran's governing elite, operatives in the Islamic State, nationalist leaders in Slovakia and Hungary, and a major Palestinian political organization. And others that claim to be Christian organizations spout the same things. It even pervades parts of mainstream British political party, the party of Mayor Khan, the Labour Party, and our university campuses too. Where did this poison come from? Is there an antidote to it? And it goes on to analyze how these blood libels about Jews came about, and some of the early examples of that, even back as far as 1144. Jew haters have thus built on different tropes in different contexts and countries. What unites modern anti-Semites, however, is the conspiratorial belief that Jews run the world. Its foundational text is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And this is a book that came out. It was published in St. Petersburg, Russia, back in the 1800s. It's a fraud. But I see it cited by people who claim to have Christian ministries as if it is fact. First published in a St. Petersburg newspaper in 1903 and subsequently reprinted many times by Russia's political and religious authorities, this forgery purported to be a blueprint for a secretive scheme to overthrow all existing governments, institutions, and religions, and in their place to construct a Jewish world empire. It is this belief, I believe, that will lead to the push for the final Holocaust that we will see unfold, unfortunately. I pray it doesn't happen, but it does appear to be prophesied will unfold in the 70th week. Since the protocols first appeared, millions of copies have been published and the text has been translated into many languages. But nowhere has it been disseminated more widely in the past half century than in the Islamic world, where political anti-Semitism is a relatively recent phenomenon. After 1948, anti-Semitism among Arabs, what happened in 1948? Israel became a country, was exacerbated by the defeat of their armies by a people traditionally confined to a subservient position in the Muslim world. The tragic consequence of the war was that hundreds of thousands of Jews from across the Arab world, members of 2,000-year-old communities, were now identified as Zionist agents persecuted and ultimately driven to seek refuge in Israel. The leader of the 1979 Iranian Revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini, declared in his book, Islamic Government, published in 1970, that, quote, Jews and their foreign backers are opposed to the very foundations of Islam and wish to establish Jewish domination throughout the world. Khomeini's successor, Ayatollah Khamenei, still the leader of Iran, the supreme leader, often denies the Holocaust, and he and other Iranian leaders routinely refer to the global dominance of Jewish and Zionist forces, terms that they use interchangeably. Throughout the Arab world, this book, The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, is banned from being published or distributed. What is striking about all of these attacks is they are directed against Jews worldwide rather than Israel itself. In part, to be sure, this reflects the Jewish state's capacity to defend itself, but it is also a sign that these anti-Semites see themselves as engaged in a global struggle against Jewry rather than just a regional contest against Israel. And it goes on to talk about how this is a very difficult problem to deal with, and it is a problem. We must make clear that the establishment of the State of Israel was a product of global, especially European anti-Semitism, and not the other way around. We must recognize that throughout history, the Jews have served as a canary in the coal mine, providing early warnings of extreme xenophobic ideologies on the rise. This is evident in radical Islamism, the most extreme contemporary manifestation of anti-Semitism. While the West thinks it is fighting a war against terrorism, Islamists are fighting a war against what they perceive to be a world Jewish conspiracy. Islamist terrorist attacks are almost certain to be preceded by, involve, or be followed by attacks on Jews, and we must adjust our security measures accordingly. You'll remember when the Jewish deli was attacked last year in France, a Jewish deli, our State Department and our president could not bring themselves to say that attack had Jews as their object. It was just happenstance. you can't think clearly on this transgender issue, you're not going to be able to think clearly on almost any other issue. They are inextricably linked together. Above all, we must be well aware of the stakes. Supporting Jewish people worldwide against the new anti-Islamism, be it Islamist, far-rightist, or leftist, is not so much of a matter of demonstrating solidarity, but of ensuring our own survival. They must eschew the example of Belgium, where the authorities asked the Jewish community to drop Purim celebrations, pleading insufficient manpower to protect them after the Brussels attacks in March. The symbolism of the great synagogue of Europe and the political capital of our continent canceling service on a major Jewish holiday was shattering. By dedicating themselves to defending Jewish institutions across the country, French security authorities have shown that they recognize that paranoid anti-Semitism is a threat to civilized values everywhere. As soon as the rest of the world wakes up to this and ensures that Jews never again will have to flee persecution, the safer we all be. Look, folks, this is highly prophetic, the way this is unfolding. Okay. I got to play a couple more clips. I'm going to go over a little bit. I apologize, but there's just too much this week. This is Melanie Phillips, interviewed recently on one of the Israeli television stations or programs, and she's talking about how people view this Israel thing in Europe, and I think it's very instructive.
If, for example, you say to people in Britain, you know, the Jews are the only people for whom the land of Israel was ever their national homeland, they look at you as if you're crazy. They have no idea. They have been told that the land of Israel was the homeland of Palestinian Muslims since time immemorial. They have no idea that historically this is absolute garbage. No one's told them. No one tells them this. They have absolutely no idea of the legal commitments entered into by Britain and the international community after the First World War, which said that on account of their unique claim to this land, the Jews should be settled throughout Palestine.
And you're talking about the intellectual community, about the press, about the theater world, the arts.
I'm talking about the
universities.
I'm certainly talking about all those people. And you know, you have this here in Israel. I'm absolutely astounded to find so many of your luminaries in the universities who themselves have no idea of Jewish history, Israel history, Middle East history, who have themselves been taught a whole load of rubbish and are teaching the young in Israel that Israel was basically born in sin. Quite a lot of the animosity in the British high-class media is fed by organizations such as Haaretz newspaper. It's coming out to a certain extent from Israeli academics. This cuts the ground from under the feet of those
yes, but there
who
is
tell
a
the
freedom
truth.
of the press in Israel, freedom of expression. Everybody can express its own views, including Haaretz.
That's absolutely fine. The problem has been that the government of Israel over many years has not understood that that is the only story being told. Freedom of the press, fine. Let Haaretz say whatever it wants to say. But somebody should be putting the truth into the public domain. And the government of Israel has not done this for many years. I mean, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, absolutely. Let's have more of it. Let's have the freedom of speech used so that people are made aware of the lies being told. Because unless people are made aware of that, how on earth are they supposed to know?
Maybe the idea of a Palestinian state, this is the solution. Maybe this will solve the problem.
Well,
it's being advocated even by Mr. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister.
Of course it would solve the problem in the abstract, but the fact is, this terrible war has been conducted over the two-state proposal. In other words, the two-state solution has been on offer, as I said earlier, from the 1930s onwards. It cannot be the solution. Every time it's been offered, there is more war. It is quite obvious. If you offer, how can it possibly be still considered to be the solution? If it were the solution, I would wish it to happen. Who could possibly object to this idyllic scenario? It could work so well. State of Israel, State of Palestine,
living side
by side, economic cooperation. You can see a great future for both countries together. Fine. But this is to ignore the reality that this has been on offer since the 1930s. The other side, the Arab side, doesn't want it. It wants Israel gone. It says so. It shows it by every word and deed, and has done consistently for 9 decades.
Miss Melanie Phillips, how many intellectual journalists in Britain share your views?
There are intellectuals who think like this, but they tend to be scorned and abused and vilified as the right wing, that all-purpose, nonsensical, infantile insult, which is designed to shut down argument. There is nothing remotely right-wing about standing up for truth against lies, justice against injustice, freedom against those who would snuff out freedom and human life.
Now, that's very good. And her point about the narrative that comes out, the stories that get told by the left, the Israeli government has not been very effective. Now, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I did meet one of the men who, a deputy consul general of Israel, at a little luncheon that was held by Friends of Israel last summer. And he said, what do we do? And I told him, I said, you need, and like I said, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I said is you need to control the narrative. Because these stories are very powerful that these people tell about abuse and all this stuff. But I said, you need to put people on a bus when they get to Israel and take them up to Ramallah and show them the mansions of all the Palestinian leaders and the malls that exist in Ramallah and in Gaza. Go show them. Show them the facts on the ground and not these made-up stories. And he said, he actually said it's not a bad idea. Look, this is a picture of sand dunes along the Mediterranean coast in Israel. It's taken on April 11th, 1909, just a little over 100 years ago. This was when the Jewish people were returning to their homeland. Those dunes are probably in the midst of that picture, which is the city of Tel Aviv today. This is Tel Aviv 100 years ago. This is Tel Aviv today, a major city. And this week we had the 60th anniversary of the nation of Israel. I could talk about the Balfour Declaration, the mandate for Palestine, the state of Israel born. I'm going to play just a part of this clip that I've played many times before. This happened 68 years ago yesterday in Tel Aviv.
On that same Friday afternoon, 5th of ER 5708, May the 14th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion arrived at the Tel Aviv Museum building. His entire life had been directed towards this very moment. This right is the natural right of the Jewish people to be masters of their own fate, like all other nations, in their own sovereign state, which would open the gates of the homeland wide to every Jew and confer upon the Jewish people the status of a fully privileged member of the Committee of Nations. Accordingly, we members of the National Executive, representatives of the Jewish community of Eretz Israel and of the Zionist movement, are here assembled on the day of the termination of the British mandate over Eretz Israel. And by virtue of our natural and historic right, and the strength of the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, here declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, to be known as the State of Israel. The State of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will be based on freedom, justice and peace as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education and culture.
First of all, I wept. Since then, I don't believe that I have shed tears. I had associations from my childhood in America. We learned at school about the Declaration of Independence. Over there, every child knows the preamble by heart and knows of the great men who signed it. And here am I, signing the Declaration of Independence.
Well, you get the point. A miraculous thing happened. It's a fulfillment. It's not complete. Don't say that I think that it is. But it's what God talked about in Ezekiel chapter 38, bringing them back in unbelief when they didn't know it. He said, I'll bring you back, and then I'll sprinkle water on you and cleanse you. So they got to be back before that happens. And we know that there is this process that happens near the end of the 7th week where I believe Israel turns, the remnant of Israel turns and repents or calls on the Messiah to rescue them. And then the promise is fulfilled. All of Israel will be saved. But that's a yet future thing. So this is not, by any stretch of the imagination, over. Caroline Glick, I won't take the time to go into it. She has a great article last Tuesday. I'll probably talk a little bit about it next week, depending on what happens this week. But time for a new diplomatic initiative. And I really think that Caroline Glick and Melanie Phillips are very wise. They're very good analysts of what's going on and what needs to be done. But we need to understand that this is going to be a central issue as we move forward towards the end. It's what was prophesied. It's happening now, right in front of our eyes, and it's unmistakably clear that this is the time. So let's pray. Father, again, thanks so much for your grace and provision for all of us, that you reach out to us when we don't deserve your grace. Father, I just pray that you always help us to keep that in the forefront of our mind. And Lord, I pray that you will steel our minds and hearts against the onslaught of a culture that has lost its way, that we will be able to be salt in our world and light, and that you will allow our light to shine even brighter as it becomes darker and darker, and that we will live holy lives waiting for the return of your Son, Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.